Greetings from National Resource Center, Shriram College of Commerce. This module aims at introducing qualitative research methods in business and management. Most scholars, practitioners, academics, and advanced students of commerce and management agree that Western concepts and theories are not able to capture the complexity and uniqueness of Indian values, ethos, and culture. Our educational institutions impart knowledge mostly, if not fully, based on models and theories developed in the Western countries. Consequently, our management professionals work in a state of paradox. They are given a knowledge developed in the Western culture, but have to work and operate in an environment of different values. But we all realize that there is a need to build a body of knowledge in the disciplines of commerce and management, which is rooted in and caters to needs of our country. Qualitative research methods have the right potential and rigor to create new concepts and theories. This is because qualitative methods like grounded theory assume that there is no theory. It allows the researcher to proceed without any preconceived notions or previously existing theories. In these methods, everything is data. All behavior, actions, words, sentences, expressions, gestures, artifacts, things, settings, context, etc., all are data. Qualitative methods focus on eliciting and examining lived experiences, which studying human behavior is all about. And these data are interpreted based on the comments, responses, and interpretations of the respondents. Another feature of qualitative research is that they permit the subjective interpretations of behavioral data. It allows interpretation of the world of others through the eyes and experience of the researcher in the world of others. Notice the words here. It is the study of world of others, but through the personal experience of the world of others. This is nothing but subjectivity and subjective interpretation. At this point, a question can be asked. If a method permits subjective interpretation, then can that method create scientifically acceptable knowledge? Technically speaking, this is an epistemological question. Epistemology is the science of knowing, and methodology is science of finding out. Before we can establish the case for qualitative research, we have to establish that qualitative research fulfills the epistemological considerations. To understand this, let us take a look at the meaning of research. Research is an effort to gain deep insight in any issue, concept, or process. It is the systematic study of any subject to discover new information or new understanding about it. The purpose of research is to advance the frontiers of knowledge by creating new knowledge. This can be done by discovering something new, or by testing the validity of what is already known, or by falsifying the existing knowledge. Now, we human beings have the gift of creativity. So, all of us are endowed with the faculty of creating knowledge. But the issue is, which knowledge can be considered as acceptable knowledge and which cannot? Human beings are endowed with creativity and ability to judge, evaluate, test, discern patterns, and generalize. Each one of us is actually creating knowledge practically every moment. For example, suppose you visited Japan. There you lost your bag, but someone took great trouble in tracing you and returning that particular bag to you. You then make a generalization that all Japanese are honest people. This is your theory. In this way, we humans keep rolling out theories. The question is, should all such theories and generalizations be accepted as knowledge? Philosophers have developed a branch of knowledge called epistemology, which essentially deals with the origin, nature, and limits of human knowledge. It also deals with the ways of knowing and researchers' belief system about the nature of knowledge. In the most simplistic form, epistemology is concerned with deciding what is acceptable knowledge, a knowledge which is acceptable to the scholars, thinkers, scientists, academics, and the intellectual class of the society. Broadly, there are two ways in which acceptable knowledge can be created, or let's say there are two schools of thought with regard to creating or generating acceptable knowledge. One is what has come to be known as Positivist school of thought, and the second is Interpretivism. Let us first take a look at Positivism. The term Positivism was coined by Auguste Comte. Comte identified society as a phenomenon that can be studied scientifically. He propagated the postulate that society could be observed and then explained logically and rationally, and therefore study of society and organizations and their practices could be as scientific as, say, biology or physics. A major strand of positivist school of thought is that the social world can and should be studied according to the same principles, procedures, and ethos as the natural sciences. The school of thought says that only that knowledge is acceptable which is experienced by five senses and is external to mind. Notice that anything not experienced by five senses will not qualify to be acceptable knowledge. Likewise, reality is assumed to be external to mind. External to mind does not mean beyond mind here. External to mind here means being objective. What it implies is that whatever is expressed about the structure and working of any phenomenon must not be influenced by any belief, prejudice, or bias. That is, it should be free of subjectivity. The second aspect of external to mind means that there must be separation between observer and the observed. The two must be different. Only then objectivity can be maintained. In addition to these two dimensions, that only that knowledge is acceptable which is experienced by five senses and which is external to mind, there are a few more requirements for any knowledge to become acceptable knowledge. According to this particular school of thought called Positivism, these are number one, only that knowledge is acceptable which is measurable. Number two, which is observable. Number three, which is repeatable. And finally, number four, which is verifiable. In the context of research in social sciences in general and commerce and management in particular, the idea is that at fundamental level, these disciplines should emulate the positivist method of the natural science because humans could be treated as complex machines. The manner in which we study the atoms, particles, and machines, we should study human beings and societies also in the same way, employing the same methods. The term social science emerges out of this only. What is as fluid as social can be treated as science only when social adopts methods of science. Most of the research in the area of commerce, business, and management is being carried out employing methodology which fits into the just stated epistemological orientation that only that knowledge is acceptable which is measurable, observable, repeatable, and verifiable, etc. That is why look at the way most of you have been writing your research articles. There is introduction, review of literature, research gap, objectives, hypothesis, quantitative data collection, and statistical processing of data. Lastly, we have discussion and conclusion in which generalization is made. In other words, we make a theory and present it to other scholars and researchers for further testing and eventual application for the benefit of the society. The entire approach centers on observation, and measurement. But this is only one way of advancing knowledge. There is another school of thought for creating acceptable knowledge. For all practical purposes, it can be considered diametrically opposite to positivism. It is known as interpretivism. It rests on the premise that natural reality, that is the reality of an atom or particle or molecule, is not the same as social reality or the reality of a person or group or community or organization. This means that different methods of research are needed to study social reality. Interpretivist approach to social science research rejects the positivist idea that same research methods can be used to study human behavior which are employed in natural sciences like chemistry and physics. Interpretivists argue that when you study the behavior of a metal, the primary cause of changes in the metal are in the environment. For example, say heat and stress. They bring change in the metal. Humans also behave the way they behave partly because of their environment. However, they are influenced by their subjective perception of their environment. That is, their subjective realities. We do not worry about the subjective impressions of the metal because it does not think. But if we are fully to understand behavior of, say, a delinquent employee, we must understand his view of the world around him. What is his thinking about it? At the same time, we must also understand what others think of him. What are their subjective perceptions about him? And we must take into account the social and cultural context in which the delinquent employee is behaving the way he is behaving. Thus, for the interpretivist, what the world means to the person or group being studied is critically important to good research in the social sciences. Interpretivists favor qualitative methods such as case studies, interviews, and observation because those methods are better ways of getting at how human beings interpret the world around them. The basic focus is that social science research aims at capturing the lived experience of humans, be it commerce or its offshoot management or psychology or anthropology or sociology. All these branches of social sciences focus on studying lived experiences of individuals and groups and communities. But the lived experiences and interpretations thereof are diverse, different, and contextual, and therefore subjective. Interpretivists recognize this dimension of multiple interpretations of same event or occurrence, whereas positivists take the view that scientists' conceptualization of reality actually directly reflects that reality. Interpretivists argue that positivist scientists' conceptualization is simply one of the many ways of knowing what reality is. Thus, if multiple interpretations of reality are recognized, subjective and contextual description should fall in the category of acceptable knowledge. Earlier in this discussion, I said that positivism accepts only that knowledge as acceptable which is observable. This actually implies that there exists an external reality, a reality which is external to the researcher, and it can be described perfectly or say nearly perfectly. But proponents of qualitative research claim that this emphasis on observed and the observable fails to recognize the enduring structures and generative mechanisms that underlie and produce the observable phenomena and events. These generative mechanisms, although not observable, can be included in the theoretical explanation of the phenomena. Thus, unlike positivists, interpretivists are perfectly content to admit into their explanations what is not directly observable or amenable to observation. As a result, hypothetical entities called generative mechanisms that account for regularities in the natural or social orders are perfectly admissible in the explanation of social phenomena. Now, having discussed the philosophical foundation or foundational basis of qualitative research, let us take a look at the main preoccupations of qualitative researchers. First and foremost preoccupation of qualitative researchers is seeing through the eyes of the people being studied. An underlying premise of qualitative researchers is that the subject matter of the social sciences, that is, people and their social world, does differ from the subject matter of the natural sciences. A key difference is that the objects of analysis of the natural sciences, namely atoms, molecules, gases, chemicals, metals, and so on, cannot attribute meaning to the events and to their environment. However, people do attribute meaning to the events and to their environment. As a result, qualitative researchers express a commitment to viewing events and the social world through the eyes of the people that they study. The social world must be interpreted from the perspective of the people being studied, rather than as though those subjects were incapable of their own reflections and interpretations of their social world. The second point is a different type of reasoning. It is neither inductive reasoning nor deductive reasoning. It is called abductive reasoning. This kind of reasoning emanates from the fact that in qualitative research, the perspectives of those one is studying are focus of research. With abduction, the researcher grounds a theoretical understanding of the context and people he or she is studying in the language, meanings, and perspectives that form their worldview. The crucial step in abduction is that researchers should first describe and understand the world from his or her participant's perspective, and then the researcher must come to a social scientific account of the social world as seen from those perspectives. Further, arriving at a social scientific account must not lose touch with the world as it is seen by those whose voices provided the data. On the face of it, this looks like an inductive logic, and indeed, there is an element of induction in this process. However, what distinguishes abduction is that the theoretical account is grounded in the worldview of those one is researching. Abduction is broadly inductive in approach, but is worth distinguishing by virtue of its reliance on explanation and understanding on participants' worldviews. Yet another focus of the qualitative researchers is on description of the phenomenon and the context in which the phenomenon is occurring. That is to say, qualitative researchers are much more inclined than quantitative researchers to provide a great deal of descriptive detail when reporting the fruits of their research. This is not to say that they are exclusively concerned with description. They are very much concerned with explanation. But the general impression is that qualitative researchers do not often ask the question why. But this is not so. No doubt, qualitative studies provide a detailed account of what goes on in the setting being investigated. Very often, qualitative studies seem to be full of apparently trivial details. For example, one researcher is studying marketing practices of vendors in the Mumbai local trains, described the crowd, their conversation, their dress, hairdos of women, types of purses they carried, and even their standing posture, etc. All this may sound trivial, but these details are frequently important for the qualitative researcher, and this is because of their significance for their subjects and also because the details provide an account of the context within which people's behavior takes place. It was with this point in mind that it is strongly recommended that there is a thick description of social settings, events, and often individuals. As a result of this emphasis on description, qualitative studies are often full of detailed information about the social worlds being examined. On the surface, some of this detail may appear irrelevant, and indeed, there is a risk of the researcher becoming too involved in descriptive detail. It is here that qualitative researcher has to exercise caution and restraint lest the descriptive detail inhibit and overwhelm the analysis of data. Let this be underlined that qualitative researchers are keen to provide considerable descriptive detail because they typically emphasize the importance of contextual understanding of social behavior. This means that behavior, values, or whatever must be understood in the particular context. This basically means that we cannot understand the behavior of members of a social group other than in terms of the specific environment in which they operate. In this way, a certain behavior that may appear odd or irrational, but it can make perfect sense when we understand the particular context within which that behavior takes place. Third aspect on which qualitative researchers emphasize is the process of occurrence of social phenomena. They are interested in understanding the processes that lead up to an event and what follows the events. For example, if you want to study the conflict resolution methods adopted by, say, servant leaders in business organizations, then as qualitative researcher, you shall be interested in the context of conflicts or differences and the interconnect of values, beliefs, and behavior of leaders as well as their subordinates. Such findings can inject a sense of process by seeing social life in terms of streams of independent events and elements. For example, take the case of a study of a strike by Weddington. The researcher was a participant observer. That is, he joined workers as one of them to collect data. He was involved in attending picket lines, mass meetings, and planning discussions and accompanying the strikers on the flying picketing and intelligence gathering maneuvers. In addition to observation, he carried out informal interviews and linked these data to other sources such as material derived from newspaper archives, company and trade union documents, letters, and richly detailed minutes of trade union management meetings. As a result, he was able to show how the contemporary beliefs, values, and attitudes of the workforce and the mutual feelings of animosity and distrust between employees and management were shaped by a sequence of historical events stretching back over 20 years. We can see in this example the development of a sense of process in at least three ways. First, he observed the strike over its entirety and gained grasp over various developments. And through this, he could understand interconnections between events in clear detail. Secondly, by connecting these events with historical and other data, researcher established links between the current strike and past events and actions. Thirdly, he identified the process of undoing of the unfolding of the strike by capturing and sketching the context in the form of the past as well as current beliefs and values and its link with the behavior during the period of a strike. This is how Qualitative researchers focus on process while examining the phenomenon. Yet another preoccupation of qualitative researchers is flexibility and lack of structure in the study of the subject or phenomenon. First of all, there is distinct and clear preference for an unstructured approach to the collection of data. The investigators do not develop highly specific research questions in advance like the quantitative researchers do, and therefore they do not devise psychometric instruments specifically for those questions to be answered. This position is largely to do with the preference for seeing through the eyes of the people being studied. In methods like ethnography and participant observation, researchers submerge themselves in the social setting. They become part of the social groups with a fairly general research focus in mind. Gradually and slowly, they formulate a narrower focus of research on the basis of observations made out of the subject or issue under study. Then they go on to formulate more specific research questions out of their collected data. Similarly, interviewing is an extremely prominent method used by qualitative researchers. They prefer less structured approaches to interviewing, such as open-ended questions. On the basis of interviews, researchers can even change the direction of the study during the course of his or her investigation, and this can be done much more easily by qualitative researchers than the quantitative researchers. Thus, the qualitative research centers on viewing the social world from the point of view of individuals to understand why social groups behave the way they behave and discern the underlying generative structures which, though not directly observable, but are very much at work. Whatever be the preoccupations of qualitative researchers, it does not mean that there is no similarity between qualitative and quantitative approaches. First and foremost similarity is that both are based on observations. Although quantitative approach lays too much emphasis on measurement also, which qualitative approach does not, but both share the two major pillars of science, namely logic and observation. A scientific understanding of the world must both make sense and correspond to what we observe. Both elements are essential to science, and both of these are present in qualitative and quantitative approaches. Apart from this, it can be pointed out that both are concerned with data reduction, answering research questions, relating data analysis to the research literature, and both seek to ensure that deliberate distortion does not occur. Both are concerned with variation also, though in different ways. Both must address the question of error, and so on. There are a number of qualitative research methods such as ethnography, case study, participant observation, phenomenology, interpretative phenomenological analysis, semiotics, and interpretive structure modeling, etc., etc. You can read about them in books like Practice of Social Research by Earl Beebe and Social Research Methods by Alan Bryman, on which this lecture is largely based. And of course, there is a very interesting Indian book by Rajan Gupta and Richa Avasthi titled Qualitative Research in Management. There is another module in this refresher course in which you will be taken step by step about a very powerful qualitative method called interpretive structure modeling. Learn these methods. I am sure you will be able to enjoy discovering the mysteries of human behavior, including financial behavior, through these methods. Thank you.